in a small, dusty village where the air tasted of sun-dried grain and children ran barefoot through narrow alleys, there lived a girl named Amara. She wasn't like the other children. While the others laughed loud, screamed through play, and sang songs in the dusk, Amara spoke in whispers. Her voice, though soft, always made people pause. She had a strange ability to speak to people's hearts, not in a magical way, but in a way that made people feel seen. But Amara didn't always speak. In fact, for many years, she chose silence. You see, Amara had learned early that words could hurt more than hunger. Her father, once a joyful trader, had lost everything in a single season. And when the money vanished, so did his warmth. Every day, her mother wore her sadness like a scarf. Tight, silent, heavy. And Amara? She became the echo of their quiet pain. The village boys teased her. Mute girl, they called her. Doll without batteries. But there was one person who always watched her differently. Old Mama Kiki. Mama Kiki was the village's herbalist, but many said she was something more. The wind tells her secrets, the children whispered. She can talk to trees. One afternoon, Amara found herself sitting under Mama Kiki's pawpaw tree. Child, the old woman said, why do you carry so many words in your chest and none in your mouth? Amara looked down. They're safer there. Mama Kiki chuckled. But words are seeds. If you bury them too deep, they rot instead of grow. That night, Amara wrote a letter to her father. She didn't give it to him, but she folded it into a paper bird and hid it in her pillow. Every day, she wrote a new one. Tiny letters of things she never said. Her pain, her wishes, her childhood dreams. One day, her little brother fell sick. Fever, chills, eyes like glass. Their mother wept quietly. Their father shouted at the doctor, at the neighbors, at the world. But no one could calm the storm. No one, except Amara. She stepped into the room, barefoot and trembling. She sat beside her brother, took his hand, and whispered, "You are not alone." She said it 3 times. And the boy somehow smiled. Her father stood in the doorway, frozen. She turned to him, voice cracking but steady. "We are all hurting, but you don't have to shout your pain." He dropped to the floor, not out of anger, but as if her words had unchained something heavy inside. That was the first time Amara truly spoke with her heart. But it wouldn't be the last. It had been 2 days since Amara's heart nearly betrayed her at the dinner table. She hadn't meant to say anything out loud, but her thoughts had swelled so loudly in her chest that the words had slipped, just a whisper, barely audible. And yet, the silence that followed had felt like the whole world had heard her. No one looked up. No one flinched. Not even her mother. They just kept talking, like her voice hadn't echoed off the walls at all. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. She wondered if she was slowly becoming invisible, or if she had always been. In school, her teachers called her a quiet achiever. She hated that term. It made it sound like silence was her superpower. But it wasn't. It was her cage. Her classmates barely noticed her unless they needed answers for homework. And even then, they spoke to her like she was a walking search engine, not a person. At home, her sister Kimmy always dominated conversations. Loud, lively, always with a funny story or a sarcastic remark. Their parents laughed easily with her. Meanwhile, Amara learned to smile politely and keep her thoughts tucked safely inside her mind. Until now, because lately the thoughts had grown heavier, and she couldn't carry them alone anymore. The next morning, she walked to school slower than usual. Not because she was tired, but because her heart was busy trying to convince her of something ridiculous. Tell someone, it whispered. Say how you feel. And be ignored again, she argued. No, thank you. But her heart was persistent. During break, she wandered to the far end of the schoolyard where few students ever went. A single bench under a tree had become her safe spot. As she sat down, she noticed someone else already there. It was Deli, the quiet boy from literature class. He was sketching something in a small notebook, his legs crossed and his brow furrowed like the world depended on the lines he was drawing. Amara paused, unsure if she should turn away. But he looked up and smiled, just enough to say it's okay. So she sat beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. It was a peaceful kind of silence, the kind Amara rarely experienced around people. Most silences were awkward. This one felt shared. Then, without turning to her, Deli said softly, "I heard you the other day." Amara's stomach flipped. "Heard me?" she asked, confused. "At the table, during lunch. You said something about feeling like a shadow." "Oh," she whispered, heart pounding. "You were there?" He nodded, still sketching. "I know what that feels like." She didn't expect tears to prick her eyes so quickly. But something about being heard, really heard, made her feel like her lungs could finally expand. "People think silence means we have nothing to say," she murmured. "But it just means no one has truly listened," he replied. They sat together in stillness after that. Two shadows who had found a small patch of sunlight. That evening, Amara didn't go straight home. She stopped by the small bookstore 2 streets from her house. It was owned by an elderly woman who always played soft jazz and never asked questions. In the back corner, she found a blank journal with a deep blue cover and soft, creamy pages. It called to her. She bought it with her saved lunch money and walked home with it clutched to her chest. That night, she wrote her first entry. "Dear voice, I know you're still here. I've silenced you for so long, but I think it's time to let you speak, even if only on these pages." Over the next week, Amara wrote every day. She didn't always write about herself. Sometimes she wrote letters to people she wished she could talk to. Other times, she created stories where girls like her found their voices and never let them go. Her heart felt lighter. Her voice, while still quiet on the outside, began to grow stronger on the inside. One day, during literature class, the teacher announced a school writing competition. Any form of writing is allowed: poetry, prose, storytelling. You have 2 weeks. Winner gets a publishing feature in the city newspaper. Kimmy, who was in the same class, groaned and muttered something about how boring that sounded. Amara, on the other hand, felt her fingers tingle. Something inside her stirred. Deli turned from the row ahead and gave her a knowing glance. "You're going to enter?" he asked later. Amara hesitated, then smiled. "I think I have something to say." Amara had never written a story for anyone but herself. Her journal was filled with unfinished thoughts, scattered feelings, and half-written dreams. But now, with the school writing competition looming, the idea of writing something others would read made her heart skip and stutter. She stared at the blank screen for hours that night. Backspace. Retype. Pause. Rethink. Why would anyone care what I have to say? Because it's real, her heart whispered. And someone needs to hear it. So she wrote. Not a fairy tale. Not a story about perfect people in perfect places. But about a girl who felt invisible. A girl whose voice had been buried beneath expectations and noise. A girl who whispered her truth into a notebook when the world wasn't looking. A girl who one day decided to speak, shaking, unsure, but still chose to be heard. She didn't give the girl a name, but she didn't need to. Anyone who had ever felt small would know who the story was about. At school, whispers about the competition spread. Some students laughed it off. Others took it seriously, rehearsing monologues and printing out pages. Kimmy rolled her eyes every time someone brought it up. What's the point? It's not like writing changes anything, she said as they walked home. Amara bit her tongue, not because she agreed, but because she knew some people had never needed words to survive. She had. 2 nights before the deadline, Amara printed her story at the cyber cafe down the road. She placed it in a brown envelope and stared at her name, typed at the bottom of the page. Amara Alayinka. Seeing it there, beneath her story, felt like standing on a rooftop and shouting into the wind. She smiled to herself. This is what breathing feels like, she thought. The next day at school, she submitted her envelope silently and went back to class like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. A week passed. Then 2. No announcements. No news. She told herself not to hope. But still, every morning her heart stood on tiptoe. Finally, during Friday assembly, the principal tapped the mic twice and cleared his throat. We're proud to announce the winner of this year's writing competition, he said. Amara looked down at her shoes. Miss Amara Alayinka from Class SS2B. The applause that followed felt distant, like a storm behind a closed window. She didn't move at first. It wasn't until Kimmy nudged her, wide-eyed, that Amara stood up, legs trembling. As she walked to the stage, her heart wasn't whispering anymore. It was roaring. The next Monday, her story was printed in the City Youth Tribune. Students pointed at her in the hallway. Some came to say they had cried while reading it. One girl hugged her and whispered, "It felt like you were telling my story too." Amara's chest tightened, not in pain, but in gratitude. Maybe that was the power of truth. It didn't need to be loud, just honest. Later that week, Deli handed her a folded sketch. It was a drawing of a small girl standing on a book, her voice forming butterflies that flew into the sky. Beneath it, he'd written, "Words don't just tell stories. They set them free." Amara didn't speak. She didn't have to. She simply nodded, blinking back tears, and tucked the sketch inside her journal. That night, she wrote a new entry. "Dear voice, we did it. You were never too small. I just needed to believe you mattered." She began to dream of new stories. Not about princesses or palaces, but about real people. People who hurt. People who healed. People who sat alone on benches and found their way back to the world. People who felt too much and didn't know where to put all the emotion until they found a pen. In class the next week, their literature teacher announced something unexpected. "We'll be starting a student storytelling club every Friday. A space to write, speak, or even just listen. All voices welcome." Deli looked over his shoulder at Amara and smiled. "I think we found our place," he said. Amara smiled back. "No," she whispered. "We made one." The storytelling club became more than just a Friday event. It became a haven, not just for Amara, but for students who had spent years pretending they were fine. Students who didn't think they had anything worth saying until someone finally listened. Some came to write. Some came to read. Others simply sat, breathing in the comfort of silence, not filled with judgment. Amara was there for all of it. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people leaned in, not just because her voice was soft, but because her words had weight. They came from places others were too scared to enter. One Friday afternoon, Mrs. Bello, the literature teacher and now club advisor, said something that stayed with Amara. "Bravery isn't always loud," she said. "Sometimes, it's choosing to show up when your heart would rather hide." Amara looked down at her journal. She'd been feeling that way lately, like her heart wanted to hide. At home, her father had grown quieter again. His laughter, once a familiar sound, now felt like a forgotten melody. The distance between him and her mother had returned, like fog rolling in through an open window. Sometimes Amara sat by the doorway, listening to them speak in low, cautious voices, tiptoeing around topics like they might break. One evening, Amara found her mother in the kitchen, stirring stew absent-mindedly. "Mama," she asked softly, "are you okay?" Her mother smiled tiredly. "I'm strong," she said, but her eyes looked like they were carrying too many things. That night, Amara wrote again. Not a story, not even a journal entry, just a letter. "To my future self, I hope by now you've learned that silence is not always strength. I hope you speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. I hope you love deeply, write freely, and never apologize for feeling too much. I hope you tell people what they mean to you before the moment passes. I hope you're still brave. Love, Amara." The next day at school, Deli approached her with a nervous look. "Can I read something to the club today?" he asked. "Of course," Amara said. "You don't need to ask." But he did, because this was the first time he was choosing to speak. When Deli stood before the circle that Friday, everyone went quiet. He held a crumpled paper in shaking hands and began. "I used to think boys weren't supposed to cry. Then my mom got sick, and I learned how to weep in silence. I never told anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. Then I met someone who made it okay to feel. Someone whose words gave mine permission to come out. Her name is Amara." Silence. Then applause. Not the loud, forced kind, but the slow, sincere kind that echoed in the room long after the last clap. Amara didn't know what to say, so she smiled. And in her heart, something soft, and sacred bloomed. That night, she told her mother she loved her. Just like that. No reason, no preface, just those 3 words. Her mother paused mid-step, then walked over and hugged her longer than she had in weeks. "I needed that," she whispered. The days passed, and the club grew. Stories became bridges. Laughter returned to lips that had forgotten how. Even the walls of the school began to feel warmer somehow. But life, as always, had other plans. One rainy Monday, news broke that Mrs. Bello was transferring to another school. Amara sat in the staff room after class, unable to speak. "Why?" she finally asked. Mrs. Bello smiled gently. "Sometimes the wind calls you to new places. But remember, my voice isn't leaving. It's in your stories now, in your courage, in everything you choose to share." That Friday was her last session with the club. She brought a small box with her. Inside were handwritten notes, one for each student. When Amara opened hers, it read, "Dear Amara, you taught me something I'll never forget. The loudest stories don't always come with shouting. Some are whispered between the lines, where truth lives. Keep writing, keep healing, keep breathing life into silence. Yours, Mrs. Bello." Amara didn't cry that day, but later that night, with her journal in her lap and a note tucked safely inside, she did. Not out of sadness, but because of how full her heart felt. The school felt different without Mrs. Bello. Her absence left a quietness in the halls that even laughter couldn't fully replace. The literature class seemed emptier, though the chairs were still filled. But something had changed in Amara, and in the others too. They no longer needed permission to tell their stories. They had found their voices, and Amara had found hers. The storytelling club continued, and this time, Amara led it. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it felt right. She created new themes each week. Letters we never sent. The moment everything changed. What I wish they knew. The stories poured in like rain, cleansing, wild, and free. Even teachers started sitting in, sometimes listening quietly from the back of the room. One Friday, as the session ended and people packed their bags, Deli stayed behind. "You should write a book," he said. Amara laughed. "About what?" "About this. All of this. About being quiet and still being enough. About how words don't have to shout to be heard." Amara paused. That night, she opened a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "The girl who spoke with her heart." And underneath, she wrote a dedication. For the quiet ones. The ones who feel deeply. The ones learning to be brave. At home, things were slowly healing. Her father had begun playing guitar again in the evenings, soft melodies that wrapped around the house like a warm scarf. Her mother still carried tired eyes, but they now had a spark in them. One evening, while helping in the kitchen, Amara asked quietly, "Were you ever scared to speak up? About anything?" Her mother nodded slowly. "Yes, many times. But I've learned something. Silence can protect you, but it can also trap you. Speaking your truth might shake things. But sometimes, things need to shake before they settle right." Weeks passed. One sunny afternoon, Amara was called to the school principal's office. Nervously, she walked in, wondering what she'd done. Instead, she was met with a kind smile. "We've nominated you," the principal said, "for the National Youth Writers Workshop in Lagos. You'll represent the school." Amara blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you. Your teachers all agreed. And your story club, it's changing lives." Amara didn't speak, but her smile said everything. The journey to Lagos was her first time leaving her town. As she sat on the bus, notebook in hand, she watched the world pass by in colors she hadn't known existed. At the workshop, she met other young writers, some loud, some shy, some bold, some broken. But all of them had one thing in common. They had something to say. When it was her turn to read, Amara walked up slowly. Her hands trembled as she opened her notebook. Then she looked out at the crowd, and for a moment, she froze. But then, she remembered Mrs. Bello's words. Sometimes, bravery is just showing up when your heart wants to hide. So she took a breath and began. "I used to think my voice didn't matter, that quiet girls should stay quiet. But I was wrong. I've learned that even the softest voice can change a room, if it speaks with truth. I've learned that hearts don't break when you speak your truth, they heal. I've learned that stories don't just entertain, they build bridges. And sometimes all someone needs is one story that makes them feel less alone. When she finished, the room was silent. Then applause. Not just polite applause, but the kind that rose from deep connection. Back home, her story was published in the school's magazine. Other schools reached out, asking if she could visit their clubs. And one day, an envelope came in the mail from a small publishing house that had read her story online. "We'd like to discuss turning your story into a book," the letter read. Amara stared at it, heart racing. Then she smiled, not because she was finally being seen, but because she had finally chosen to be heard. Years later, a young girl walked into a new school and sat at the back of the class. She was quiet, shy, always writing in a small green notebook. One day, a teacher handed her a book during free reading time. Its title, "The Girl Who Spoke with Her Heart." The girl read it cover to cover in 2 days. And on the third day, she walked up to her teacher and said, "I want to start a story club." And just like that, the stories began again.